The most important AI fight this weekend is not about the smartest model. It is about whether the next generation of AI stays open enough for everyone else to build on. That may sound abstract, but it is starting to shape a very practical question. In the next few years, will most companies own meaningful parts of their AI stack, or will they mostly rent intelligence from a small set of providers forever? That is why this story matters right now. On Friday, July 24, 2026, Microsoft published a policy page called Open Weights and American AI Leadership. On the surface, it reads like a policy statement. In reality, it feels more like a line in the sand. The company argues that open weight models should not be treated as a fringe experiment or a safety failure by default. Instead, Microsoft says they are part of the foundation for competition, access, customer control, and long-term American AI leadership. Around the same time, TechCrunch reported that Washington is weighing how to respond to Chinese AI advances and to allegations of intellectual property misuse tied to open-weight model development. And a little earlier, on July 14, 2026, Mozilla published a new report saying open-source AI has crossed an important threshold. Its framing is blunt. The question is no longer whether open models can matter. The question is who will control the layers around them, who will make money from them, and whether open ecosystems will actually be allowed to scale. Put those pieces together and you get the real story. This is no longer a niche debate between researchers on social media. It is becoming a fight about the structure of the AI economy. So first, what are open weights? In simple terms, open weight models are AI models whose parameters can be downloaded, inspected, modified, and run on your own infrastructure. That does not automatically mean every part of their training process is open, and it does not mean there are no restrictions at all, but it does mean you have much more control than you do with a normal closed chatbot product where the model lives somewhere else. The pricing can change, the policy can change, the product can disappear, and you never really own the stack. That difference sounds technical, but it has huge business consequences. If a company can run a strong model itself, it can tune it for a specific workflow, keep more control over privacy and cost, and avoid complete dependence on one outside vendor. If a startup can build on a capable open model, it may not need to spend all of its money on frontier model API builds. If a government, hospital, school, or factory wants to keep more of its system local, open-weight models make that more realistic. That is the pro-open side in one sentence. Openness is not only ideology, it is leverage. Microsoft's July 24 page makes this case very directly. It says open weights expand access, strengthen competition, give customers more control, and let organizations adapt AI to their own needs instead of accepting one-size-fits-all intelligence as a service. It also argues that safety is not guaranteed by closed systems alone. In fact, Microsoft leans into a more provocative idea. Openness may be one of the important paths to security because defenders, researchers, and organizations need access to capable models too. That is a big shift in tone from the older story, where open models were often discussed mainly as a safety liability. Mozilla pushes that shift further. Its July 14 write-up says the performance gap between top open and closed systems has narrowed sharply, but the money has not followed in the same way. According to Mozilla's framing, open models now power a significant share of real-world usage, while capturing only a small share of the revenue. That matters, because it means the value created by openness may be getting harvested somewhere else, often by companies that wrap, host, distribute, or control the surrounding experience. And that takes us to the deeper layer. The real fight is no longer just model versus model. Mozilla says the most important layer may now be the harness around the model, the software that decides what the AI can see, remember, access, and do. That means the future power centers may not be only the labs with the most impressive benchmark charts. They may also be the companies that control the workflow layer, the app layer, the permissions layer, the orchestration layer, and the customer relationship. That is why this debate has become so strategic. If open-weight models remain viable, the model itself becomes more like infrastructure. It becomes something many players can build on, customize, and compete around. In that world, more value can shift outward into applications, tools, services, and vertical expertise. If open-weight models get squeezed too hard, the opposite happens. The model layer stays concentrated. More companies remain renters instead of owners, and the AI economy starts to look more like a handful of giant toll booths. That is what makes the Washington angle so important. TechCrunch reports that the current policy pressure is tied partly to concern about Chinese open-weight models and to allegations that some model builders may have used improper techniques to extract value from closed systems. One of the flashpoints is Moonshot AI and its Kimi K3 model. The exact legal and technical questions there are still contested, and it is important not to flatten them into a cartoon. But even if you put the specific allegations aside, the larger issue is clear. Policymakers are trying to figure out how to punish real abuse without accidentally crushing an entire mode of AI development. That distinction matters because techniques like distillation exist on a spectrum. At one end, there are widely used, legitimate practices for model improvement, evaluation, and adaptation. At the other end, there can be conduct that crosses legal or commercial lines. The Microsoft statement argues that policymakers should not blur those categories and should avoid sweeping restrictions that hit legitimate work along with actual misappropriation. In other words, the industry is saying, target bad behavior, not the whole open ecosystem. And there is a reason so many different kinds of companies are showing up on that side. Of course, Microsoft has a stake here. So do Nvidia, cloud platforms, startup tooling companies, open model platforms, and app builders. If models are more available and more interchangeable, then more people will need chips, hosting, fine-tuning, evaluation tools, developer platforms, and domain-specific applications. More openness can create more total surface area for business. But the story is not just self-interest from big vendors. There is also a real startup story here. If powerful AI stays mostly closed and expensive, the next wave of founders builds on rented intelligence with thin margins and limited control. They become dependent on other companies' pricing, rate limits, turns, safety filters, and roadmap decisions. If strong open-weight models remain available, founders can build products that are cheaper, more specialized, more private, and in some cases more defensible. They can decide what to optimize. They can own more of the stack. They can experiment without asking permission every 5 minutes. That is why this is not just an argument for hobbyists or open source purists. It is also an argument about who gets to be economically relevant in the next AI cycle. Then there is the security argument, which is where the debate gets genuinely complicated. The anti-open side worries that broader access to powerful models can help attackers. That is not a silly concern. If a model is widely available, bad actors may try to use it for cyberattacks, fraud, or harmful automation. That risk is real, but the pro-open side has a counterargument that is getting harder to dismiss. Microsoft says defenders need access to strong models too. TechCrunch points to a recent Hugging Face security episode in which closed commercial models reportedly failed to help enough on the defense side because of their guardrails, forcing a pivot toward a powerful open-weight alternative. If that pattern becomes common, then the idea that closed equals safer starts to look less complete. Maybe the truth is that safety is not determined only by whether a model is open or closed. Maybe it depends on who can test it, audit it, adapt it, and deploy it responsibly inside real security workflows. That is a much messier answer, but it is probably closer to reality. And it leads to the biggest takeaway in this whole story. The real battle is moving beyond the model. The model still matters. Of course it does. But once open-weight systems become good enough, the decisive advantages shift elsewhere. They shift to integration, memory, tools, interfaces, permissions, data pipelines, trust, distribution, and workflow design. They shift to who can make AI actually useful, not just impressive. That is why this fight matters even if you never download a model yourself. If policymakers allow a broad open ecosystem to keep growing, consumers and businesses may get a more competitive market, lower costs, and more product diversity. If they overreact and lock the market down too tightly, we may get a future where a few companies own most of the useful intelligence layer and everyone else buys access on their terms. So what happens next? There are basically 3 paths. The first is a hard restriction path, where Washington responds to the China and IP concerns with broad rules that make open-weight development much harder. That might protect some incumbents in the short term, but it could also weaken startup competition, slow experimentation, and push more innovation overseas. The second is a laissez-faire path, where almost everything stays open and policymakers mostly hope the market sorts itself out. That preserves experimentation, but it may not adequately address genuinely abusive behavior or real national security concerns. The third path, and probably the most realistic one, is a narrower middle path. Target actual misuse. Build clearer legal standards around theft, model extraction, and harmful deployment. Invest in domestic compute and tooling, but do not treat openness itself as the enemy. That is basically the lane Microsoft is arguing for, and Mozilla's report makes it sound more urgent by saying the world is already moving fast. If the United States wants AI leadership to spread beyond a few giant closed systems, then it has to decide now whether open-weight development is a strategic asset or a strategic threat. That decision will shape much more than policy headlines. It will shape whether AI becomes something only a few companies truly own, or something a much wider ecosystem can adapt and build into the real economy. So the big takeaway is this: the next AI fight is not only brains versus brains. It is openness versus dependence. It is ownership versus rent. It is ecosystems versus toll booths. And that is why open-weight AI just became the real fight in Washington.